When my husband passed away, I thought I had already reached the bottom of grief, but the real tragedy was only beginning. The night after the funeral, my daughter-in-law threw my luggage into the garage and said coldly, "From now on, you'll be sleeping with the dog." I didn't react. I just nodded and smiled. She had no idea that behind my silence, I was holding a far greater secret: the tens of millions of dollars and the seaside mansion my husband had left behind. That night, in the damp chill of the garage, I swore I would rewrite the rules, with the calm resolve of a widow who had loved deeply and endured enough. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Cassandra Reed, 60 years old. I had just buried my husband of 42 years, Gordon Reed. That morning, a light rain fell over Memorial Oaks Cemetery in Houston. Each drop felt as cold as steel against the damp earth. Black umbrellas formed a ring around the flag-draped coffin, while the soft sound of an organ played somewhere in the distance. The air was thick, filled with the scent of lilies, wet soil, and tears. I stood there, gripping my shawl tightly, trying to balance between sorrow and a strange kind of emptiness. People say that after death, love is all that remains. But that day I realized love isn't the only thing that survives ambition and hypocrisy do too. My son Nathan sat quietly in the front row, eyes red and swollen. My daughter-in-law Sable was different. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble like someone mourning a loved one. Instead, she watched her gaze flicking from one guest to another, as if she were sorting and calculating who might be useful later. When I caught that look, I knew immediately. This wasn't grief. This was the beginning of a plan. As the priest praised Gordon's generosity and devotion to his family, I saw Sable's jaw tighten. Beneath her black veil, her eyes were as cold as stone. A chill ran down my spine, not from the weather, but from the realization that I had been waiting for this very moment, waiting for my husband to be lowered into the ground so she could begin dividing what remained. When the ceremony ended, people left one by one, leaving only white flowers trembling in the rain. I leaned over the coffin, laid my hand on it, and whispered, "Rest easy, Gordon. I'll be fine. I promise." I didn't know that only a few hours later, that promise would become a vow to reclaim justice for myself. The black Mercedes rolled slowly through the familiar streets of Houston. I sat in the back seat, watching the tall buildings fade behind a curtain of rain. The whole city looked like it was trapped under a sheet of glass, cold and distant. The seat beside me was empty, the place where Gordon used to sit when he drove me to church or to dinner parties. Now it was just me, the hollow embrace of leather seats, and the meaningless hum of warm air from the vent. In the front seat, Sable drove, her dark red nails tapping rhythmically against the steering wheel. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror occasionally, meeting mine without an ounce of sympathy. Nathan sat beside her, gripping his phone tightly, as if any wrong word might make everything fall apart. No one spoke for the entire ride home. When the car turned onto the oak-lined driveway leading to our two-story home in River Oaks, where Gordon and I had lived for over 20 years, my heart clenched. That house once overflowed with laughter, the smell of apple pie and jazz music every Saturday night. Now it felt hollow, a battleground instead of a home. When the car stopped, I opened the door and froze. My 3 brown leather suitcases, the ones I'd packed just to stay at Nathan's house for a few days after the funeral, were already sitting by the garage, in the rain. A thin layer of dust coated them, as if they'd been put out early that morning. I looked up at Sable, standing on the porch with her arms crossed. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice raw after a long day. She shrugged, a faint smirk forming on her lips. "Oh, I thought you already understood. Now that Gordon's gone, things have to change." Her tone was light, but every word landed like a blade. Nathan stood behind her, staring at the floor. "Son," I said softly, "what does your wife mean by that?" He avoided my eyes. It's just temporary, Mom. We just need to rearrange a few things. Before I could say anything else, Sable stepped forward, pulled open the garage door, and said clearly, "You can stay here. The room next to the dogs is still empty." Then she turned her back on me as if she'd just finished some trivial task and walked inside. Her heels clicked sharply against the wooden floor, a cold sound that echoed through the rain. I stood still for a few seconds, letting the tremor in my hands subside. The rain kept falling, and the drops ran down my face, mixing with tears I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I bent down, grabbed my suitcases, and pulled them into the corner of the garage, a small, narrow space where Gordon used to keep his toolbox. The walls were stained and damp, the air smelled of rust and oil, and the tiny window looked out toward the iron fence behind the house. It was not a place for a mother-in-law, let alone the woman who had built this family alongside Gordon, but I didn't cry again. I simply exhaled and sat on the edge of the old folding cot Sable had prepared for me. On the small wooden table beside it sat a half-empty box of dog food. A faint smile crossed my lips, not because I found it funny, but because I realized something important. I had just entered the first stage of a game whose rules only I knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain drummed steadily on the metal roof like a clock ticking away time. I sat in the dark, replaying every detail of my life. Gordon, the calm and disciplined man he was, had always told me, "Cass, I think you're weak. Let them. The right silence is your strongest weapon." I never thought I'd need that advice, but tonight I knew the time had come. Because no one knew that before Gordon passed away, he had quietly arranged everything: the accounts, the investments, even the Azure Cove villa in Cancun. Everything was under my name. The total value, $19 million. I was the only one who knew the codes, the only one who had the keys. And Sable? She thought I was just a frail widow living off her son. I smiled the same smile Gordon once called, the smile of someone who already knows how the story ends. When morning came, I was still sitting by the small window in the garage, watching the first drops of dew fall. I heard Sable moving around upstairs, the clink of dishes, the smell of coffee drifting through the air. She was living in the glow of victory, and I was simply waiting for the first card to turn. I knew exactly what to do: stay quiet, watch, remember, and when the time was right, I'd remind them who truly owned this house. Later that morning, Nathan came into the garage before heading to work. He hesitated at the door, then said softly, "I'm sorry, Mom. Sable's just under stress. Everything will be fine." I looked at my son, the same boy who once cried in my arms when his first dog died at age 8, and realized he'd been swallowed by fear of conflict. "It's all right, Nathan," I said gently. "I know where I belong." The door closed. The sound of the car faded away. I looked around the cold room, my fingers brushing against the locket Gordon had left me. A draft came through the gap under the door, carrying the damp smell of gasoline. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "All right, Cassandra. Start from here." That evening, while Sable and Nathan dined in the spacious dining room, I listened to their laughter from below. I wasn't jealous, nor was I angry. I just sat there in the dark, writing my plan step by step in a small notebook. Observe. Record every habit. Find weaknesses. Wait, because in every war, the silent ones are always the most dangerous. And in that house where I'd been pushed down to live beside the dogs, I knew the greatest battle of my life had just begun. I used to think there was no room in that house that could feel unfamiliar to me until I stepped into the one they said I'd stay in for a while. A small, damp room with one narrow window looking out toward the trash bins. The walls were stained, the ceiling water-marked, and the concrete floor felt like ice. In the middle stood a rusty iron bed tilted to one side, its mattress sagging with the weight of someone forgotten. Next to the wall was a low shelf holding a few cans of dog food and a lamp without a shade. I set my suitcases down and cracked the window open. The air carried the smell of wet grass and garbage. Outside, the backyard light flickered yellow through a torn curtain. Upstairs, I heard Sable's voice echo down. "You should be grateful we're letting you stay. This isn't a hotel." Her words fell like drops of acid. I didn't answer. When Gordon was alive, this space had been a tool shed he used to joke and call it the tech room. Now it was my bedroom, where I had to learn to breathe softly so no one would notice. The first morning of my new life began earlier than I expected. At 6 a.m., when the dogs barked, Sable was already at the door, holding a cup of coffee. "You can help me with breakfast," she said lightly, as if giving an order. "I have a meeting at 8. She didn't wait for a response, just glanced around the room once and walked away. I changed into an old dress, wrapped a thin scarf around my neck, and went upstairs. The cold from the tiled floor seeped through my feet. On the kitchen counter lay everything already set out: eggs, bacon, bread, oranges, and a note scribbled in her handwriting. "Eggs Benedict for Nathan. The kids like pancakes. I'll have something light, just salad." The word "I" was underlined, as if she needed to mark her territory. I turned on the stove, my hands trembling not from fear, but from memory. Back then, Gordon always made breakfast. He loved his old-fashioned coffee, and I'd watch him toast bread while telling stories from his military days. Now I was in the same kitchen, but every trace of warmth had been wiped away. When I brought out the food, Nathan came downstairs. His eyes avoided mine. He looked tired. "Morning, Mom," he murmured, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek like it was an obligation. I smiled. "Did you sleep well?" "Kind of." He glanced around and added, "Don't take it personally. Sable's just tense." "I understand," I said softly. The truth was, I understood far more than he thought. He was trapped between duty and fear. Sable knew exactly how to make a man feel guilty just for breathing wrong. When everyone sat down to eat, I stayed by the counter. Sable looked up, her tone calm but cold. "You can clear the dishes when we're done. And don't forget to feed the dogs." "No, please." "No, thank you." Nathan sipped his coffee, avoiding my gaze. Their children, Ava and Liam, glanced my way, uncertain. I smiled gently at them. Ava lowered her head, while Liam scratched his neck, trying to smile back. After they left, the house fell silent. I stood alone in the kitchen, the only sound the ticking of the clock. I washed dishes, wiped counters, and folded towels, each motion like a ritual of endurance. By noon, I was hanging laundry in the backyard. The heat carried the scent of soap mixed with sunlight. I looked toward the magnolia tree Gordon had planted years ago. It was taller than the roof now, its white blossoms glowing under the sunday. I remembered his hand, his deep laugh when he said, "This tree will shade you one day, Cass. When you're old, all you'll need is to sit beneath it." Now I really was old, sitting under that same tree, but no one was sitting beside me anymore. In the afternoon, Ava and Liam came home from school. I made cookies for them, just like I used to. Ava hesitated, looking at the tray. "Grandma, Mom said you don't have to do that anymore. She said you should rest." I smiled. I like doing it. "Go ahead, they're still warm." The girl glanced around, then picked one up and took a small bite. Her face lit up. Liam rushed over, grabbed two, and slipped them into his pocket. "Don't tell your mom," I whispered with a wink. They nodded, then ran upstairs. I watched them go, my heart aching but warm. At least there were still two souls in this house who hadn't been taught that kindness was a weakness. Around 6 p.m., Sable came home. She walked straight into the living room, dropped her purse on the table, opened her phone, and started a video call. Her voice changed from cold to syrupy in seconds. I heard her laugh. "God, I'm exhausted, but it helps having a free housemate around." A woman's laughter echoed from the phone. I froze mid-motion, the dish towel slipping from my hand. I wanted to step out and say that the so-called free maid was once the woman who signed the very first check that bought this house, but I didn't. I simply bent down, picked up the towel, folded it neatly, and kept wiping the same spot. She thought I didn't hear her. I let her think that. When night fell, I sat in my small room, lit only by the weak glow of a yellow lamp. The sound of the TV drifted down from the living room laughter, the clinking of silverware against plates, the kids arguing over cartoons. I didn't feel angry, just an emptiness spreading quietly inside me. I opened the small leather notebook Gordon had given me for our 40th wedding anniversary, the cover worn, still faintly scented with old paper. I wrote on the first page, Day 1. No one remembers who I used to be. They think I've lost my worth. But I won't remind them, I'll let them find out on their own. Then I began noting down every small detail. Sable came home at 5:47 p.m., her coat reeking of expensive perfume. Nathan arrived later, 5:52, looking tired and avoiding conflict. Ava and Liam ate dinner at 6:10. Sable chatted on the phone with someone, laughing loudly. At 7:35, she locked the master bedroom door. The lines looked dry and emotionless, but to me, each one was a fragment of a map leading to the truth. Late that night, I sat listening to the rain. Moist air crept through the cracks in the door, cold against my skin. I pulled the thin blanket over me. The streetlight outside cast my shadow onto the wall, an old, small woman sitting alone in the dark. Invisible, unwanted, forgotten. I smiled faintly, just a flicker of light breaking through the night. I was no longer Cassandra Reed, wife of Gordon Reed, lady of the River Oaks house. I was the woman pushed to the lowest floor of the very home I helped build. But from this lowest place, I would watch, learn, and prepare for my return. When the clock neared midnight, I closed the notebook and slipped it under my pillow. The ceiling glowed faintly from passing headlights. I thought of something Gordon once said at our last dinner together. If one day you find yourself at the bottom, Cass, remember the ground there will help you push back up. In the darkness, I whispered. Thank you, Gordon. I still remember how to rise. Outside, the rain had stopped. Crickets chirped, and the wind slipped through the cracks. I closed my eyes, breathing steadily. Tomorrow, I would keep cleaning floors, washing clothes, and brewing coffee at 7 a.m., just as they expected me to. Because only by pretending to be who they thought I was, could I stay long enough to see what I needed to see. And when the time came, I would be the only one who knew how to turn the game around inside this very house. Each morning began the same way, the coffee machine humming upstairs and Sable's heels tapping across the hardwood floor. The clock in the garage read 5:30 a.m. I woke before the alarm out of habit. The room was cold, heavy with the smell of rust and damp air. I slipped on an old cardigan, tied my hair back, and stepped into the hallway. Outside, dawn was still gray. The neighbor's porch light cast a pale glow through my window, stretching a long shadow across the floor. I climbed the stairs and opened the kitchen door. Everything looked perfect, just the way Sable liked it. Polished granite counters, utensils lined in perfect rows, and the tablecloth ironed flat without a single crease. I began my routine, the unpaid maid. Eggs Benedict for Nathan. Pancakes for the kids. Salad with no dressing for Sable. She feared gaining weight but never skipped her morning whipped cream latte. I cooked, arranged, and cleaned according to the schedule she'd written on the note taped to the fridge. Every task had to be done down to the minute. If breakfast was 5 minutes late, Sable would purse her lips and say, "You need to manage your time better." Nathan usually came downstairs around 10 to 7, Ty already nodded, his cologne still fresh. "Morning, Mom," he'd say without looking up from his phone. I'd smile. "Soft-boiled or hard today?" "As usual." "Thanks, Mom," he'd reply, eyes still on the screen. Sable appeared last, always with that deliberate air of being busy. "Press my navy dress, please. I have a presentation at the club today." She didn't even glance at me, just poured her coffee and sat down with her fashion magazine. "And clean my nude heels? There's a stain on the heel?" "No, please. No, thank you." Her voice was light, detached, like someone giving orders to a subordinate. Nathan rarely stayed home after fall oration. Breakfast. He'd leave behind the dishes and a quick, "I have to get to the office." The door closed, and his car pulled away. I heard Sable pacing the house, her high heels tapping steadily across the floor. She was on the phone, half whispering, half laughing. I looked into a nursing home in Dallas. "The cost is way cheaper than keeping her here. No, Nathan doesn't need to know." Men are easy to convince, just say financial benefit, and they'll agree. I stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, still holding a damp rag. Each word dripped into my ear like acid, slow and burning. A nursing home. Cheaper. Those two words echoed in my head. I understood then. To Sable, I was no longer her husband's mother. I was an expense she was eager to cut. At noon, I ate a slice of cold bread in my room. The old air conditioner upstairs rattled faintly. I opened my notebook and added a new line. Day 7. Sable researching nursing homes in Dallas. I wasn't angry, just calm, unnervingly calm. Anger clouds, judgment, and I needed clarity more than ever. That afternoon, I went upstairs to iron clothes. In Sable's dressing room, the air reeked of Chanel perfume and new fabric. Her closet doors were wide open, rows of dresses, shoes, and bags arranged by color. I ironed each one carefully, as though touching something that no longer belonged to me. On the vanity table, a credit card statement had blown open. I hadn't meant to look, but the bold print caught my eye. Spa Serenity, $1,200. Another page read, Yoga Retreat Aspen, $3,450. I frowned. Nathan had told me just last week that his company was tightening the budget, and yet Sable had bought a new Hermes bag. I didn't touch a thing. I simply took note. That afternoon, when Ava and Liam came home, I was folding laundry on the sofa. Ava approached, holding her sketchbook. "Grandma, why don't you go back to your own house? Mom doesn't seem happy with you here." I smiled and brushed her hair. "I'm saving money, sweetheart. It's easier to take care of you two this way." Ava tilted her head, her eyes wiser than her years. "But Grandma, you don't need to save. Dad said you have savings." I smiled gently. "Did he?" "Well, sometimes adults save things not to spend but to wait for the right time." She nodded, not fully understanding, but she stayed quiet. Liam ran up, waving a paper. "Look, Grandma, I got an A in history." I hugged him, feeling my heart soften. In this cold house, those two children were the only warmth left. That evening, Nathan came home late. His tie was loose, sweat dampened his collar. "Have you eaten?" I asked. "Not yet, but don't worry." Sable said she's ordering takeout. I just nodded. As he climbed the stairs, I heard Sable's voice drift from the living room. "I told you. The cost of keeping your mom here is higher than I expected. If we move her to a nursing home, we can sell the house in Galveston. Doesn't that make more sense?" Nathan was silent for a long time, then murmured, "Sable, Mom's still healthy. It's not that bad yet." "You're always so soft," she scoffed. "By the time you realize it, the money will already be gone." I stood in the shadows by the staircase, listening to every word. I didn't interrupt. I'd learned that silence, used wisely, is worth more than 1,000 arguments. After dinner, when everyone was asleep, I cleaned the kitchen. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I washed each glass, dried it, and placed it neatly on the shelf. The reflection of the cold marble countertop shimmered under the light. I opened the drawer and took out my leather notebook. My pen moved slowly, each word deliberate. Day 8. Spa and yoga bills don't match. Nathan seems unaware. Sable mentioned selling the Galveston house. On the next page, I wrote 3 bold words: start tracking everything. I wasn't great with technology, but Gordon had taught me how to use online banking and manage financial records. His old office still had the desktop computer and the old ledger books. I knew the password. Every night, once the house was asleep, I went upstairs. The pale blue glow of the screen lit my face. I checked the joint bank account. Nathan and Sable shared the one Gordon had helped set up to support their startup. After a few searches, I noticed a suspicious pattern. Regular cash withdrawals each month, sometimes a few $1,000s, sometimes more than $10,000. The recipient was a company called Serene Holdings LLC. I looked it up. No office, no employees. Just a P.O. box address in Dallas. I sat there for a long time. The smell of cold coffee filled the room. Then I turned off the computer, closed the door, and went back down to the garage. Before sleeping, I wrote in my notebook, "Numbers don't add up. Money is disappearing. Need to confirm. Say nothing to Nathan." I set the pen down and glanced around the small room. The streetlight outside cast a beam across the rusty wall. I lay down, listening to the insects outside and the wind brushing against the roof. I knew they wanted me gone from this house. But what they didn't understand was this. When a woman has lost everything, her dignity is the last thing she'll fight for. And I, Cassandra Reed, had begun my battle not with screams, but with a pen and deadly silence. I waited until Sable and Nathan left the house before picking up the phone. The air in the kitchen that morning felt heavy, as if someone had sealed every door and forgotten to leave an exit. On the table, a cup of cold coffee sat untouched. I looked out the window at the magnolia garden bathed in early May sunlight, the white blossoms still blooming, though no one cared to look. I took a deep breath and dialed. The man's voice on the other end made my hands tremble slightly. "Morton Law Office, this is Caleb speaking." "Caleb, it's me, Cassandra Reed." A pause, then his voice softened, warm and careful. "Mrs. Reed, I've been expecting your call. When can you come in? There are a few things you need to see right away." I checked the clock, only 8:40 a.m. Sable had already driven off to her meeting. Nathan was likely at the office. "I'll be there in an hour," I said, and hung up. I changed into a simple cream-colored dress, tied my hair neatly, and picked up my small handbag. Before leaving, I opened the bottom drawer, took out my leather notebook, a pen, and the old key Gordon had once used for his private safe. Holding them felt like holding the last piece of myself. The drive to Morton and Associates wasn't long, but I took it slow. Morning traffic filled Houston. Sunlight flickered through the windshield, glinting on my hands. It felt strange yet familiar once. I'd been the woman sitting in the passenger seat beside Gordon, listening to him talk about markets and investments. Now, I was driving alone in silence. Caleb's office was in an old red brick building in Midtown. A brass nameplate bearing his name gleamed in the sunlight. He greeted me at the door, the same calm presence as always: gray suit, blue tie, and the kind smile of a man who'd worked with Gordon for nearly 20 years. "Cassandra," he said, shaking my hand, "it's good to see you again. And my condolences once more." I nodded lightly. "Thank you, Caleb, but I didn't come here today to grieve." He nodded and motioned for me to step into the conference room. It was bright, with landscape paintings on the walls, a glossy mahogany table, and the faint scent of fresh paper mingled with Earl Grey tea. On the table sat a thick file in a blue cover labeled "Assets and Trust of Gordon Reed." Caleb opened the file, his voice slow and precise, like a man reading a will back to memory. Gordon set up a fideicomiso, a form of asset trust similar to a trust, but it secures ownership for the beneficiary in Mexico. This Highland Park estate home, the Azure Cove Villa in Cancun, all stocks, bonds, and investment accounts are in your name, not co-owned, entirely yours. I sat still, My ears rang. Caleb slid over another stack of papers, with a familiar signature at the top. Gordon's hand, slightly slanted, firm and steady, just like when he used to sign our Christmas cards. I read slowly, line by line, until the handwritten note at the end. Make sure Cass never has to depend on anyone. Never. I set the papers down. My hands trembled. A sob slipped out before I could stop it. Caleb gently handed me a tissue. He prepared these more than a year ago, after a heart-related hospital stay. He told me, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid Cass might have to ask someone's permission to live in her own home." I couldn't speak. I only felt pain spreading through me, mixed with a strange warmth, as if Gordon were still sitting beside me, holding my hand across time. Caleb continued, voice even, "The current estimated total is $19 million. That includes the Highland Park property, the Azure Cove Villa, a portfolio of energy stocks, government bonds, and retirement investment accounts, all sealed under your name." I swallowed. "And Nathan?" "He has a portion, but at a support level. Gordon used to say, if Nathan has a good head on his shoulders, he'll build his own wealth. If not, giving him too much will only spoil him." I laughed through tears. That was exactly Gordon, practical, blunt, yet full of love. Caleb folded his hands, sitting across from me. "Cassandra, I know you're under pressure. My advice, don't let anyone know about this, especially Sable. Keep everything as usual. When the time is right, I'll guide you through formalizing it all." I nodded. "I understand. Thank you, Caleb. Truly. Gordon said you're the only person he trusted to use money the right way." He smiled softly, and I believe he was right. Outside the office, I stood on the stoop for a long time. Traffic wind tugged at the edge of my shawl. Sunlight slanted across the street, making everything glare bright. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Tears still clung to my cheeks, but I didn't feel cold inside anymore. People say money can't buy happiness. Maybe that's true. But it can buy the freedom to choose how you'll be treated. On the way home, I stopped at a small corner cafe. I ordered a cappuccino, the drink Gordon always ordered for me every Sunday morning. While I waited, I opened my phone, created a new email account with a password longer than 16 characters, and set up automatic backups for the files Caleb had sent. Each step was careful, exact, as if I were rebuilding a fortress around myself. When I got home, Sable was already there. She sat on the sofa on a call, her voice oddly sweet. "Yes, I can move the money by the weekend. Just make sure everything's finalized before next month, all right?" I walked lightly through the living room, keeping my face neutral. Sable glanced at me and said one last line into the phone. "Okay, we'll talk later." Then she hung up and smiled. "Oh, you're back? I was just about to ask for a small favor." That evening, I cooked a simple dinner for the family. Nathan looked worn out, while Sable talked nonstop about a real estate investment in Dallas. Her eyes lit up like someone staring at a dream. My partner and I are looking at a new project. If it goes smoothly, with just $50,000 down, the return could double in 6 months. I sliced the meat and smiled. "Sounds promising. Have you checked the legal side of the project?" She paused, then forced a laugh. "Of course! I'm not stupid." Nathan murmured something, clearly clueless about the plan. I sat quietly and listened, adding more vegetables to Ava's plate while I calculated. If Sable really moved the money, I could track it through the statements. But not tonight. Tonight, I needed silence. Night fell. The house went dark, leaving only the glow from the living room TV. I lay on the old iron bed, laptop screen lit. I saved all of Caleb's documents to a secure drive, then printed copies to store in the small safe Gordon left. I changed my bank passwords, activated two-factor authentication, and created a hidden account to route data there. Each keystroke felt like a steady heartbeat, not fear, cold clarity. Upstairs, Sable laughed loudly in the master bedroom. Her voice echoed through the floor like a hollow sound in an empty house. Nathan stayed quiet, as always. I closed the laptop and smiled to myself. She thought she was living in victory, that I was just a forgetful old woman waiting to be thrown out. She didn't know the game had begun, and the first move was already mine. I closed my leather notebook, set it by my pillow, and turned off the light. In the dark, I heard the wind moving through the magnolias outside, soft but persistent like Gordon's voice drifting back. "Cass, when you know the truth, don't be afraid. Use it like light." I shut my eyes and answered silently. "Yes, love. The light is back. And this time, it will shine straight at the ones who think they're above it all." I've always believed the best liars slip up in the smallest details, like the perfume they wear for an afternoon yoga class. That morning, Sable carried a white leather bag, wore tight leggings, but did full TV-ready makeup, dark red lips, shimmery silver eyelids, and perfume so strong it drowned out the smell of coffee in the kitchen. I didn't ask. I stood at the sink washing dishes, watching her reflection in the window. "Nathan," she said sweetly, "have lunch with your client, okay? I've got yoga downtown and might be home late." He just murmured an okay, not a hint of doubt. The garage door shut. The car engine faded. I checked the clock. 9:52 a.m. She said yoga downtown. But I knew there were beige high heels in her trunk, the kind no one wears to yoga. I dried my hands and grabbed my purse. Inside was just one thing that mattered: Gordon's old phone, which I'd set up to record video discreetly. Late morning Houston blazed with Sunday. I called a cab and told the driver to follow the pearl-white BMW ahead. The driver, an older man, glanced at me in the mirror and smiled lightly. People only follow someone when, deep down, they already know what they're going to find. "You know that, right?" I answered softly. "I do. And I'm ready." We turned down brick-paved streets and stopped at the Argonaut Hotel, an upscale spot downtown where people go to close deals or have affairs, sometimes both. I asked the driver to wait, then stepped out. Hot wind carried the damp smell of asphalt and a trace of luxury perfume from the grand lobby. I stood a few yards from the door, sunglasses on, watching. In under 5 minutes, Sable stepped out of her car, heels flashing in the Sunday fitted aqua silk dress, softly curled hair, and a smile I'd never seen at home. She walked straight inside without looking around. I followed at a safe distance. The lobby smelled of polished wood and white orchids. In the corner near the bar sat Derek Cole. I recognized him from a broker profile photo. Young, tall, slicked back hair, and the polished grin of a man selling illusions. Sable sat across from him. They touched hands across the table, and he slid a thick brown envelope toward her. I paused near a planter, pulled out the phone, and pressed and held the screen. The camera started rolling. They talked for about 15 minutes. I couldn't catch every word, but her face said enough. Whatever they agreed on had nothing to do with yoga or wellness. At the end, Derek took her hand and kissed her wrist. Sable giggled, tilting her head, letting him. I had enough. When she stood to leave, I slipped back toward the exit and blended into the crowd. On the ride home, I watched the recording. Sable's face was clear, proud eyes, a thick envelope in her hand, lips saying something that made Derek laugh. I scrubbed through and zoomed in. She touched his lapel, a wordless promise. I saved the video twice, one on the phone, one to a private cloud. By late afternoon, the sky threatened rain. Nathan got home earlier than usual, shirt damp, bringing in the smell of a new storm. Sable was already there, hair up, workout clothes on, a towel around her neck. She stood at the mirror, voice soft as mist. "You know, yoga was packed today. But I feel so much lighter. I should go more often." Nathan smiled, believing her. "I'm glad you could unwind." I walked by and set a tray on the table. Sable's eyes slid over me cold as steel, but she kept smiling. "Cassandra, could you make me a cup of herbal tea? I need to detox." "Of course," I said. "With perfume that strong today, I think you really do need a detox." She froze for just a second, then laughed a little too brightly. "You're always so direct." I carried the tray away, oddly calm. That line, a small blade I'd thrown just to see how she'd react, and in that smile, she'd let a tremor show. That night, the house was unusually quiet. Around nearly 11 p.m., I heard Sable's heels clicking down the hall and stopping in the living room. I held my breath. She didn't realize the glow from her laptop leaked through the cracked door, the kind of light that betrays secrets. When she went upstairs, I waited 10 more minutes. Then I stepped out, silent as a shadow. The laptop was still open. No password. I sat, heart pounding, hands steady. The screen showed an inbox mid-session. The top subject line read, "Divorce paperwork nearly finished, just waiting on the estate confirmation." When I read that line, "Divorce paperwork nearly finished, just waiting on the estate confirmation," my heart didn't hurt like I expected. It just went cold. Cold like love had never lived in this house. And you, if you were in my place, what would you do after learning someone in your home was waiting to sign a verdict of betrayal? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know whether your heart would choose silence or a fight. Below it, the sender's name, David Carrera, personal attorney. I scrolled slowly and read each line. Once the asset transfer is complete, you can proceed with the divorce without legal obstacles. As agreed, the portion in your husband's name can be moved through the shell company established in Dallas. Make sure the mother-in-law doesn't interfere. D. I felt my heart go still, like a lake before a storm. It wasn't anger anymore, it was absolute clarity. She didn't just want to humiliate me, she was plotting to steal Nathan's entire life, and if she succeeded, she would take every asset she thought belonged to his family. I took out my phone, switched to silent mode, and photographed every page of the email. Then I plugged in a small USB drive, the kind Gordon used for contracts, and copied all the data. Time crawled, suffocating. Each mouse click sounded like a heartbeat pounding through the silent room. When it finished, I pulled the USB, cleared the browsing history, and shut the laptop. I stood and listened. Upstairs, Sable laughed, the hollow laugh of someone who thinks she's hidden everything perfectly. I went back to my small room under the garage. Streetlights spilled across the wall, splitting my shadow in two. One half the humiliated woman, the other half the one who had just seized power. I opened my own laptop and created a new folder named Lotus, the name Gordon used in his love letters. "Cass, you're a lotus rising from mud, but never stained." I saved all the data there, then sent a copy to the secret email account only I knew. Another copy went to Caleb Morton, no message attached, just the subject line, "Keep this for me, in case it's needed." Done. I leaned back in my chair. Rain drummed on the garage roof like a steady drumbeat. I smiled slightly. In the dark, I stared up at the ceiling and thought of Gordon, the man who told me, "Never hand your fate to someone who can't keep their word." I hadn't listened at first, but now I had. Sable Hart thought she was the hunter, but every hunter has someone hunting them. She thought she was about to slip out of the cage, not knowing she'd already stepped into the trap I was setting. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. A faint smile touched my lips, not the smile of a victor, but of someone newly awake. It rained all night in Houston, but I didn't feel cold. Because I knew, from this moment on, the power game no longer belonged to Sable. That morning, I heard the office door upstairs creak open. The soft scrape of metal on wood made me flinch. Nathan rarely went into that room. Since Gordon passed, the door had stayed shut, gathering dust like a memory no one dared to touch. I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard him call, voice hoarse and shocked. "Mom! Mom! Come up here a second." The sound made me look up immediately. For months, Nathan had never used that tone, the voice of a son staring at something his mind couldn't yet process. I dried my hands and climbed the stairs, heart racing though my face stayed calm. The office door stood wide open. Morning light poured through the window, washing over the oak desk. Nathan stood there holding a stack of yellowed papers. I recognized them at once, Gordon's original will. The desk drawer had been pulled out. Papers were scattered. But that file lay centered on the wood, as if the owner himself had just set it down. Nathan looked at me, eyes wide, confused and wounded. "Mom, this house is yours?" I stepped closer, tracing the familiar slant of Gordon's firm handwriting. I said quietly, steady, "Yes. Your father wanted to protect me. He was afraid I'd be hurt if everything fell into the wrong hands." Nathan said nothing. He clutched the papers tighter, as if the weight of the truth had settled on his shoulders. At that moment, Sable appeared at the door. Her eyes were knife-sharp, lipstick blazing red, hair tousled like she'd just gotten up, but her voice was loud and clear. "What is that? What are you holding, Nathan?" He didn't hide it in time. He turned and stammered, It's Dad's will." Sable strode forward and snatched the document. Her eyes darted across the lines, then she suddenly screamed, "No way! You hid this? You pretended to be poor to manipulate us." I straightened, set my coffee cup down slowly, and met her gaze with a look I knew she'd never seen from me before. "Manipulate? No, Sable. I stayed silent to see what you'd do when you thought you had power." She laughed, harsh and shrill. "Oh, that's rich. You expect us to believe you were just observing, while you let me cook, clean, and take care of you like a maid?" I raised an eyebrow and said nothing. Nathan cut in, voice shaking. "Sable, that's enough." "Enough?" She snapped at him. "How naive are you, Nathan? She played the victim to make you feel guilty, and now she claims this house is hers? Can't you see she's laughing at us?" I calmly opened my purse and took out an envelope. Inside were photos of Sable at the Argonaut Hotel laughing with Derek Cole, envelope in hand. Sunlight from the window lit the desk as I laid them down beside the will. Then I added printed emails, words that couldn't be denied. "Maybe," I said evenly. "You should read these before you tell another lie." Silence filled the office. Only the clock ticked. Sable held the photos, her eyes widening, lips trembling. You followed me?" "No," I said. "I went to your yoga class. Turns out that's where people sign divorce paperwork and divide assets." Nathan was frozen. When he read the last line of the email, his face went white. He looked at his wife, voice choked. "Sable, divorce paperwork nearly finished, waiting on the estate confirmation? What does that mean?" She set the papers down and tried to steady herself. "You don't understand. It's a financial plan. It's betrayal," I cut in, my voice level, each word dropping like a stone. "Betrayal of the husband who trusted you and the mother you treated as a burden." Sable stepped back, cheeks flushed with fury. "You have no right to say that. You deceived us. You pretended to be broke to test us? What are you trying to prove?" I looked straight into her eyes, then at Nathan, head bowed, fists clenched. "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said, voice low. "I simply let you show who you really are." Nathan's hands shook. He set the papers on the desk and whispered, "I've been so stupid." "No," I said softly. "You've just been silent too long, and silence, Nathan, can be crueler than action." He lifted his head, eyes wet. "Mom, I'm sorry." I shook my head. "Don't say it. Just look at how you stayed silent and understand why they felt free to treat your mother like that." The room went quiet again. Only Sable's ragged breathing broke the air. She stepped back, then suddenly screamed, voice rough, "This old woman tricked us. You're no better than a liar." I smiled slightly, just enough to stop her short. "No, Sable. I didn't trick anyone. I was patient and let everyone reveal their own nature." I sat in Gordon's old chair. my hand on the desk, feeling the grain and every scar time had left. Here, for years, I'd sat beside my husband, planning dreams and next steps. Today, I sat alone, but I was no longer the woman shoved to the lowest floor. Nathan sank into the chair across from me, head bowed. Sable stood by the wall, breathing hard, eyes darting like a cornered animal. I opened the drawer and set a small key on the desk, the safe key. Inside are all documents for the assets, accounts, and the villa in Cancun. And this, I looked straight at Sable, is evidence of everything you've done. If I choose, one phone call sends it all to my attorney. Sable stiffened, then laughed bitterly. You think you've won? I stood and adjusted my collar. Morning light caught my face and reflected in eyes that no longer knew fear. No, Sable, I haven't won. I've simply taken back the place I never should have lost. Nathan left first wordless, steps heavy. It was just me and her. Sable leaned against the wall, hands shaking, lips pressed tight. You know, she said quietly, I used to think you were weak. Turns out you were just waiting for the right moment to twist the knife. I looked at her calmly. No, Sable, I didn't stab anyone. I simply stopped letting people step on me. She swallowed, turned, and hurried out. The door slammed, rattling the glass. I sat down and looked around the room, everything the same, except for how I felt. A chapter closed. No noise, no theatrics, just the truth, shattered open bright as sunlight through glass. That afternoon, I put Gordon's desk in order. In the drawer, his old fountain pen remained. I lifted it, wiped it clean, and placed it in its case. On the shelf, the family photo was still there, me, Gordon, Nathan, the 2 grandkids, and Sable. I took the frame down, slid out the glass, and removed the picture, then carefully cut it in half. The right side where Sable stood, I folded and placed in a separate envelope, locking it in the cabinet. I didn't hate her. Hate is a burden. I simply remembered. Because memory is the strongest evidence of justice. As afternoon light spilled across the floor in a band of gold, I knew that from this moment on, I was officially back in my rightful place as the lady of this house and of my life. And this time, I would never let anyone push me to the lowest floor again. The next noon, Houston's sky hung low and gray, heavy with storm. The house felt weighted, as if everything inside were bracing for the inevitable. I sat in the living room sorting Caleb's documents for the next steps when a door upstairs slammed hard, furious, relentless. Nathan came down pale, fists clenched. "Mom," he said, voice shaking but firm. "I can't take this anymore." I looked at him and didn't ask. He swallowed and continued. "I read everything. I saw the emails, the photos. I know you're not making this up, and I know I've stayed silent for too long." I laid a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "It's all right, Nathan. I knew this day would come." He drew a breath and shouted, "Sable, come down here!" His voice tore through the house, slicing down the stairs and slamming against the walls. I heard a door fly open and the sharp strikes of high heels on wood. Sable descended, bright red dress, heavy lipstick, face like ice. "What are you yelling about?" she snapped. "Get out of this house," Nathan said, each word thrown into the air like a brick. Sable laughed, not wounded but contemptuous. "Get out of this house? What on earth are you talking about, Nathan?" She tilted her head, mocking. "This house was never yours. Look around. Everything here is because of me. And you? You just go to work and sit. Without me, this place would look worse than that garage your mother lives in." Nathan clenched his fists, his lips trembling, but he didn't answer right away. I stood up and stepped between them. "Sable," I said softly but firmly, "you should stop." She snapped toward me, the smile gone. "You." "No again. That's enough, Cassandra. I don't need another lecture. You think a few wool papers mean you can throw me out?" I kept my eyes steady on her. "I don't need to throw anyone out, Sable. You're the one walking yourself out. The kids," Ava and Liam, were standing at the bottom of the stairs, clinging to each other. Their eyes were wide with fear, watching the adults like a storm rolling in. I turned to them, gave a gentle smile, and kept my voice light as air. "It's okay, you two. Grown-ups will handle this." Ava nodded and tugged her brother back to their room, but I could see her small hands still shaking. Sable stood there, breathing hard. Then she pulled out her phone, holding it up, her voice going high. "I'll call my lawyer. I'll prove you forged those documents, Cassandra. You'll regret this." I looked at her for a moment, then answered slowly but surely. "Maybe. But I don't live on threats, Sable. I live on the truth. And the truth can't be twisted forever." She glared at me, lips pressed tight, then turned to Nathan. "You'll regret siding with her." Nathan didn't look at her again. He just said quietly, his voice breaking, "I already regret it, for not protecting my mother sooner." That sentence silenced the whole house. For a few seconds I could hear wind hissing through the window frame, and the TV in the next room was still on, but nobody cared. Sable bit her lip, then screamed, her voice raw. "You'll both pay for this. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house." I turned away and pulled my phone from my pocket. "Caleb," I said when he picked up, "activate the asset protection. And change every lock today. I'll have Miss Hart escorted out." I hung up and looked straight at Sable. "You have 15 minutes to pack. After that, the locks are changed." She stared at me in disbelief, then let out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won, Cassandra? You'll be alone. You've lived your whole life in your husband's shadow." I shook my head. "No, Sable. I've learned how to live without anyone's pity." She threw her purse to the floor and strode toward the stairs, each step striking a sharp, ringing note. A few minutes later, she dragged a suitcase down, the wheels banging against the steps, a dry, hard sound. Nathan watched, saying nothing. She passed him, paused for a second, then said coldly, "You'll miss me, but by then it'll be too late." No one answered. The door opened and slammed shut. Her car engine roared, then rolled off the stone drive. I stood still, looking out the window. The white BMW slipped away under the gray sky, leaving a thin line of smoke to fade. The house fell quiet after she left, a strange kind of quiet, not suffocating, not scary, just relief. I turned to Nathan. He stood against the wall, shoulders slumped, eyes red. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said softly. I walked over and put a hand on my son's shoulder. "No need to say anything. Just start over. Every wound can heal, Nathan, if you let it." He nodded, fighting tears, then sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. A stifled sob escaped small, but enough to twist my heart. I went to get Gordon's old blanket, a deep blue wool throw he used on fishing trips. I laid it over Nathan's shoulders as gently as laying down forgiveness. "Your father used to say," I whispered, "a strong man isn't one who never falls, it's the one who stands back up and isn't ashamed to cry." Nathan looked up, his eyes shining under the lamp. He nodded and murmured, "Thank you, Mom." I walked toward the stairs. The master bedroom was at the end of the upstairs hall, where I'd slept with Gordon for 40 years. I opened the door and turned on the light. The room still carried a faint scent of oak and lavender. Everything was where it had always been, the cream silk drapes, the wedding photo on the table, the armchair where Gordon read the paper. I moved slowly around the room, touching each thing, as if I were taking back pieces of my soul that had been stripped away. This room had once meant peace, then became off-limits. Now I was back. I changed the lock, checked each latch, then opened the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pale moonlight fell over the magnolias in the yard. Leaves shivered. A cool breeze drifted in, carrying the damp scent of earth. I drew a deep breath and felt a simple freedom I hadn't tasted in a long time. That night, I lay in the old bed, listening to the steady tick of the clock, Downstairs, I could still hear Nathan's quiet sobs now and then, but they faded. Ava and Liam were fast asleep. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift. In my thoughts, I saw Gordon sitting at the edge of the bed, wearing his kind smile like always. "You did well, Cass," he said in my memory. "You stood up at the right time." A tear fell, but it was a tear of peace. For the first time in months, the Reed house was truly quiet. No high heels, no snide remarks, no contemptuous stares. Just the stillness of someone returning to herself. I whispered to the dark, "Welcome back, Cassandra. This is your home." And that night, I slept soundly, truly soundly, as if the whole house were breathing with me. A week later, Houston was sunny again. Harsh light pierced the living room window, making the dust motes glitter like a golden shower. I was rereading the investment reports Caleb had sent when the doorbell rang, a long, decisive ding, as if whoever was outside wanted to assert their right to be there. I didn't rush to get up. From my seat, I peeked through the curtain. Sable. And beside her, a man in a gray suit, slicked hair, pointed chin, Derek Cole. I smiled slightly. Some people never tire. I opened the door without a word. Sable gave a stiff smile, her lips shaking. Derek bowed his head, voice smooth. "Mrs. Reed, we're here to talk civilly." I quietly stepped aside to let them in. In my mind, every piece was already placed like a chess game, where I knew exactly who would make the final losing move. Sable sat on the sofa but didn't lean back. Her posture was taut. Derek sat next to her and set his briefcase on the table. I looked at them for a moment, then said, "You seem busy. Get to the point." Sable took a breath, trying for a soft tone. "Cassandra, we're all adults. I don't want this to be a battlefield. I just think, if you truly care about Ava and Liam, you should consider a settlement." I raised an eyebrow. "A settlement?" Derek opened the briefcase and took out an envelope. "You have substantial assets," he said, calm, like he was negotiating a property deal. "We're only asking for a small amount, $3 million. Call it support to stabilize things for the kids." I laughed short and sharp, like a blade cutting the air. $3 million? To stabilize? Sable jumped in, voice higher, shaky but trying to stay composed. "You have more than enough. Gordon left $19 million, not counting stocks and real estate. We're asking for a small portion for Ava and Liam. You can't take everything. You're not young anymore." I leaned back, fingers interlaced. "And if I say no?" Derek gave a polite smile. "Then we'll have to go the legal route. I know people at the county courthouse. At your age, a few light evaluations and they could rule you incompetent. Control of the assets would shift to a guardian, maybe your son, or someone else." I didn't move. I let each of his words fall like ice. Sable added, eyes flashing meanly, "Can you picture Ava and Liam testifying? Kids are honest, Cassandra. Once they say you forgot their names or mixed up meal times, the court will believe it." I stayed still. Then I rose slowly and walked to the wooden cabinet by the window. I opened the third drawer and took out a black folder. "You," I said quietly. I thought I'd let things pass peacefully. Turns out, some people don't understand where to stop. I set the folder on the table so gently it barely made a sound. On the cover, Cole, Derek, personal debt record. Derek frowned at it. "What is this?" I opened it, revealing statements, bank logs, and betting slips. "I know you owe $200,000 to a Dallas casino, and I know you forged a partner's signature in a small Austin real estate deal. I have full copies." His face shifted from calm to panic. He swallowed and tried to steady his voice. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said, silk smooth. "I'm telling you that if I file, you lose your license. And when that happens, don't expect anyone to hire a broker tied to fraud and gambling." Sable turned to Derek, her face going pale. "Derek, say something." But he only stammered, She can't possibly know, I cut in. I know more than you think. And not just about you. I turned to Sable, my gaze so calm it made her step back. As for you, Sable, if I send this video to the court, you won't just lose your reputation, you'll lose custody. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up with the footage from the Argonaut. Sable laughing, touching Derek's lapel, then signing a document. She exhaled hard, almost choking. No, you can't. I can. And I will if you stay here one more minute. The living room fell silent. The wall clock tick, tick, tick like a countdown to their last moment in this house. Derek collapsed into the chair, hand over his face. Sable shook, trying to stay upright, tears starting to fall. You're being cruel, she said, voice breaking. I just wanted to take care of my kids. I looked at her for a long time. Take care of them? You left Ava to sleep alone for 2 nights because you were busy at a hotel with him. I have camera footage. You chose what mattered. Most. Sable. And it wasn't your children. She sank onto the sofa, hands over her face, sobbing. Derek looked up, voice ragged. What do you want from us? I answered simply, nothing. Just for you to leave. I walked to the door and unlocked it. Noon light poured in, brightening the whole room. Get out of my house, I said slowly, clearly. Right now. Derek stood first, shoulders shaking, head bowed, not daring to look at me. Sable stayed seated, tears running. She looked around as if seeing for the first time that this house had never been hers. Cassandra, she choked. You'll regret throwing out the mother of your grandchildren. I looked at her not with hatred, but with a calm, tired resolve. I'm just choosing to protect what I should have protected long ago. She lowered her head. Derek took her hand and helped her up. They walked slowly to the door. At the threshold, Sable looked back one last time, tears streaming, but I said nothing more. The door closed with a dry click. That sound echoed through the house like a period at the end of a long nightmare. I stood still in the living room. Sunlight slid across the floor, drawing long streaks on the rug. I felt my shoulders grow lighter, as if a burden years old had just dropped away. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and took it out to the porch. The air was still, with only the wind and the rustle of magnolia leaves. Somewhere, children's laughter drifted from afar, Ava and Liam playing in the backyard. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the sun sink into my skin. When I opened them, I smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of release. I knew the final battle was over, and this time, I didn't just keep my house, I kept myself. 3 days after the last confrontation, I got a call from Caleb Morton. His voice was low but firm, the tone of someone used to facing storms. Cassandra, everything's ready, he said. I just filed for protective orders and a restraining order with the county court. Sable Hart and Derek Cole won't be able to come near you or any member of your family for 2 years. If they violate it, the police will handle it immediately. I sat on the porch, looking out at the freshly trimmed magnolia garden. The morning light was soft, white blossoms trembled in the breeze. The peace felt strange, like the world had finally stopped spinning so I could breathe. Thank you, Caleb, I said. I don't want to see them ever again. Caleb chuckled quietly. And you won't have to. The law can be slow, but when it moves, it's powerful. That afternoon, Nathan went to the law office to sign the official divorce papers. When he came back, he sat at the dining table, eyes tired but brighter than usual. It's done, Mom, he said hoarsely. I submitted all the evidence, the emails, the video, the recorded threats. The attorney says this will move fast. Sable has nowhere left to turn. I nodded and didn't ask anything more. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, You know, the hardest part isn't the divorce. It's facing the truth that I let you endure it alone all that time. I looked at my son, a 38-year-old man. hair beginning to gray, shoulders weighted with guilt and remorse. I laid my hand on his and smiled. "You faced it, Nathan. That's the first step to healing. Don't keep punishing yourself. Everyone has to learn to say, 'I'm sorry,' and then live it." He bowed his head, gripping my hand without another word. The next week, the Houston Press began to report on it. Headline in the Houston Chronicle on Tuesday morning: "Real estate broker Derek Cole investigated for financial fraud and extortion." The article was long, with a photo of him leaving the courthouse, head down. Another paper ran a subhead: "Source reveals whistleblower is widow of the late businessman Gordon Reed." I folded the paper, neither pleased nor upset. I wasn't seeking attention. I just wanted justice to be seen, even if only in a few columns of print. Caleb called that afternoon, sounding more at ease. "The investigation is widening. The Dallas casino confirmed Derek Cole owes exactly $200,000 and once impersonated a partner. Police are reviewing potential fraud charges." I answered simply, "Good." There's no joy in watching someone fall, but there is a quiet relief when the truth is put back where it belongs. In the days that followed, the Reed house settled into its old rhythm for the first time in years. Every sound felt gentle. Ava and Liam still went to school as usual, but I noticed something different in their eyes. They no longer looked at me with hesitation. There was warmth and trust instead. One afternoon, Ava asked, "Grandma, why do you and Dad talk so much?" I smiled and said, "Because sometimes grown-ups have to relearn how to talk like kids honestly, without hiding." She nodded, then whispered, "I like it when you tell the truth." "Mom, well, my old mom used to say things that weren't true." I hugged her, my heart softening. I knew their inner scars would remain, but I also knew I could help them tell the difference between real love and exploitation, a lesson that took me nearly a lifetime to learn. A few weeks later, Caleb and I sat in his office to finalize the last paperwork. On the table was a new file, cream-colored cover labeled Reed Foundation, Scholarship and Educational Trust. Caleb slid it toward me. "Everything's in order. You can start the scholarship program for Ava, Liam, and other children if you'd like." I picked up Gordon's fountain pen and signed beneath the word Founder. As the ink soaked into the paper, I felt something both complete and aching inside me. I said quietly, "He would be proud, wouldn't he?" Caleb smiled. "I believe so. Gordon used to say, 'Cass doesn't just preserve assets, she plants value.'" I left the office feeling light as air. I knew I'd done the right thing, not just to set things right, but to create something new out of old ashes. Nathan began therapy on his doctor's advice. At first he resisted, but slowly I saw him change. He spoke more slowly, listened more. One evening he stood outside my door and knocked softly. "Mom, I just wanted to say, thank you for not giving up on me." I opened the door and smiled at him. I had no reason to. "Just remember, forgiving isn't forgetting. It's stopping the past from running your life." He nodded, then smiled, gentle as when he was a boy. I also decided to hire a new housekeeper, Estelle, a Dominican woman in her 50s, kind and discreet. When she asked, "Do you want me to clean the downstairs too?" I answered, "No, leave it as is. I want that room empty." It's a reminder that I was pushed down, and I walked back up. Estelle just nodded and didn't ask more. The house began to bloom again. Every morning, the smell of baked goods drifted through the kitchen, blending with the sound of Ava and Liam laughing. I no longer felt like the maid in my own home. I was the true mistress of the house, but more than that, a woman who had reclaimed her dignity. That night, I sat alone in Gordon's study. On the desk was the old wooden box he left me. I opened the lid and took out a yellowed letter. The handwriting slanted but steady. "You'll be free if you wait until you're truly clear-headed. Don't strike back in anger, Cass. Only when you see everything clearly will you truly win." I sat quietly, reading the lines over and over. Outside, A light wind carried a few magnolia leaves drifting across the porch, I said softly, as if Gordon were still right there. I waited, Gordon. And I did it. Then I smiled the smile of someone who survived, woke up, and finally became free. 3 months after things settled down, I packed my bags. No fuss, no send-off. I simply told Nathan, "Son, I need a few months to set things straight, both in my head and in my heart." He understood, nodded, and hugged me for a long time. "Go, Mom. Call me when you feel at peace." The flight to Cancun took nearly 3 hours, but to me it felt like a lifetime. From the plane window, the ocean unfurled endlessly, so blue I had to blink to believe it wasn't a dream. Gordon used to say, "If there's a place on Earth where time stops for me, it's Azure Cove." Now I was returning there, Azure Cove Villa, the home he bought for our 40th anniversary. The taxi stopped along a road winding by the shore. The sea ahead looked like a sheet of blue silk stretched across the sky, waves brushing the fine sand. The villa tucked among tall palms, white walls, red tile roof, windows thrown open toward the ocean. When I stepped inside, the scent of salt mixed with familiar old wood, a fragrance that flooded me with memories. I threw open the main windows. Sea wind rushed in, billowing the white curtains. Light flooded the room, illuminating each piece Gordon had chosen, a hand-painted canvas by a local artist, an oak rocking chair, our wedding photo smiling in the sunday. I stood there a long time, then whispered, "I'm home, Gordon." On my first afternoon in Cancun, I walked the beach. The sand was powder soft, the water a stretch of turquoise without end. Ripples lapped at my ankles, cool and clear. I slipped off my sandals and let the sea rinse away the dust of hard years. People say the ocean can wash away wounds. I don't know if that's true, but in that moment, I did feel lighter. The next day, I hired a local couple, Lucia and Matteo, to care for the villa. Lucia was petite, long black hair, eyes gentle like someone who's understood too much. Matteo was quiet, few words, meticulous hands. As I showed them around, Lucia smiled, her Spanish laced with English. "This house has a present. Soul, Señora. It feels like it's been waiting for someone to return." I smiled. Maybe that someone is me. From that day, the villa wasn't empty anymore. Each morning, Lucia opened the windows to let the sun pour in, and Matteo trimmed the garden. Wind, waves, and the smell of morning coffee blended into a soft hymn of life. I settled into a new rhythm. At 6 a.m., I walked the shoreline, carrying Gordon's old straw hat. The waves beat steady. Each footprint I left was erased, a reminder that the past can't be held, only the present is real. I often sat on a rock by the water and watched the sun lift from the horizon, blazing and calm. In the vast sound of the sea, I could almost hear someone whisper in my ear, "You're okay now, Cass." Finally okay. At noon, I went to the local hospital, where volunteers help American tourists with health issues. They needed an English speaker, and I signed up at once. It wasn't heavy work, but it made me feel useful again. I helped an elderly woman from Minnesota find the right medication, comforted a young man with a broken leg from a diving accident, and sometimes just chatted with lost visitors in the halls. A young nurse told me, "Señora Reed, you bring a sense of peace. Everyone who talks to you seems lighter." I smiled, maybe because I've weathered a lot. Those who've known storms learn to speak softly. In the evenings, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset fall over the sea. The sky shifted from gold to pink to violet, then slipped into night. Lights from the boats offshore flickered like drifting stars. That's when Nathan usually called on video. Every Sunday, his face showed on the screen, tired but at ease. Behind him, Ava and Liam jostled to tell their stories. "Grandma, I got an A in history." "Grandma, I got the lead in the school play." I listened, smiling until my eyes blurred. Nathan looked at me and said quietly, "You seem happier than ever, Mom." Answered, "Maybe because I'm not afraid anymore. You know, only when fear is gone do we really live." Sometimes I sent money from the Reed Foundation to help pay tuition for children in town. Lucia helped me choose families in need. I didn't want to be the rich recluse by the sea, but someone who gives in the right way. Each time I signed a transfer, I remembered Gordon's words. "Money is just a tool, Cass. The real value is how you use it." Nathan changed a lot too. He went to therapy regularly and learned how to share with his kids. On our calls, he no longer avoided my eyes. I heard a tenderness in his voice I'd never heard before. Ava and Liam grew and grew wiser. They told me that every night, Nathan read them Gordon's letters as a way to show them how their grandpa had loved this family. In the 3rd month, I hosted a small dinner. Lucia made Yucatan-style grilled fish, and Mateo picked an old bottle of red wine Gordon had left. I put on soft music and opened the windows to let the breeze in. The sound of the waves blended with the wine's aroma and our laughter. I raised my glass and said quietly, "Thank you for being here, for helping this house come back to life." Lucia pressed a hand to her chest and smiled. "No, Senora, you're the one who warmed this place up." That night after they left, I walked the house alone. High ceilings, white walls, moonlight pouring through the windows onto the wood floor. The whole space was still, with only the steady sound of the waves like breathing. I stepped onto the balcony and looked at the sea. The night sky stretched wide, and far-off boat lights looked like falling stars on the water. I leaned on the railing, inhaled the salty air, and felt something I can't quite name, peace mixed with gratitude. Before going to bed, I didn't lock the door. Not because I was careless, but because I didn't need to defend myself anymore. No more threats, no more fear under this roof. I lay down on the wide bed, soft blanket pulled up, the window cracked to let the sea breeze in. Outside, the waves lapped gently, a steady rhythm like Gordon's heart beating somewhere in the dark. I closed my eyes and whispered on a breath, "I'm still a mother, a grandmother, and a free woman." Finally, and for the first time in years, I slept soundly without locking the door, as if the whole world had forgiven me and I had forgiven myself. Mornings at Azure Cove always start with the sound of the waves. They're never loud, just steady, like the heartbeat of a place that's learned to forgive. I usually make a cup of tea, take it out to the porch, and watch the sun slowly climb over the edge of the sea. The first light is pale gold, shining on the wedding photo of Gordon and me on the small wooden table. One morning like that, Ava sat beside me. She'd grown taller, hair tied neatly behind her back. She stayed quiet for a long time, then asked in a hush, as if afraid to break the waves, "Grandma, are you still mad at Mom?" I set my tea down and looked out at the water, where sunlight danced on the surface. "No," I said, "I'm not mad, but I haven't forgotten." Ava tilted her head. "What does not forgetting mean?" I smiled. "It means remembering so we don't get lost again, sweetheart. Some wounds don't need ointment, they just need us to stop touching them." She nodded, then rested her head on my shoulder. The wind carried the smell of salt and the sound of children laughing somewhere in it. A few weeks later, Nathan brought the kids to visit me. He looked healthier, his eyes calmer than before. At lunch, I took out a thick envelope and set it on the table. "Nathan, these are the papers transferring the Houston house," I said. "That home is yours now, along with a fund to maintain it until Ava and Liam are grown." He looked up, stunned. "Mom, no, that's your house. You should keep it." I shook my head, voice light as the breeze. "No, son. Your father wanted you to learn to stand on your own. You've done that now, and this is the rest of the lesson. I don't need that house to feel safe anymore." He was quiet for a long time, then stood and hugged me tight. I heard him whisper, barely above a breath, "I promise I won't let you and Dad down again." That afternoon, Ava and Liam sat in the kitchen with me. I taught Ava how to keep a journal, a habit I've had since I was her age. You don't have to write well, I said. Just be honest. Some things can't be spoken, but when you write them down, they get lighter. Ava smiled and wrote her first line. Today, Grandma taught me to write about feelings instead of being scared of them. Liam, who loves standing by the stove, was eager to learn to cook. He asked me, "Grandma, why is cooking so important?" I said, "Because it's the simplest way to show love. People who cook learn to wait, to care, to listen." He nodded hard, then burned the first pancake. I laughed and he blushed. By late afternoon, we all cleaned up together. Ava taught me how to use TikTok, how to scroll, how to like, how to read comments. "Grandma, don't tap the ads by mistake." I pretended to be serious. "So I'm modern now, huh?" Both kids burst out laughing. "Grandma, you're more trending than our mom," Liam said, and I laughed until tears came. But there were quiet afternoons too, the kind that tug at your heart. When the kids had gone back to Houston, I stayed alone in the white villa. The waves still broke, the wind still blew, but something in me had grown lighter, as if the last threads of resentment had loosened on their own, leaving a calm space behind. That evening, I checked my phone. A text came from an unknown number, just a few lines. "Cassandra, I'm sorry for everything." The sender's name, Sable. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My finger paused. Over reply, then I quietly deleted the message. Not out of anger, but because I no longer cared. Some apologies arrive too late to matter, because the person listening no longer needs to hear them. Late that night, I sat in Gordon's study. The wood desk still held a small scratch where he used to sign his first contracts. In the drawer were a few blank sheets and his favorite black fountain pen. I took it out, uncapped it, and began to write. "Gordon, I kept what you left me, my dignity. It took me years to learn that winning isn't revenge. It's standing up without losing your kindness. Nathan has learned how to love again, and Ava and Liam are growing in the light, without fear. As for me, I'm not angry at anyone anymore, not even myself. Azure Cove is a place of peace now, not a place of painful memories. Thank you for believing I was strong enough to walk this whole road." I folded the letter and placed it in the nightstand drawer, right beside our wedding photo. In the picture, I'm smiling, and Gordon is looking at me with that gentle gaze, the look of a man who knows the woman beside him will never bow to injustice. That night, I opened the window. Waves pulsed offshore, the moon laying silver light across the water. I sat on the bed, my hand resting on the drawer where the letter lay. Inside me there was no more emptiness, no more sighing. Only the stillness of someone who crossed a storm without losing her heart. Lucia was right, this house has a soul, but I think I'm the one who was brought back to life here. Off the coast, waves kept breaking, echoing against the rocks and fading, like thousands of tiny needles stitching the tears in my heart closed. The needles of time, forgiveness, and love. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Gordon, I've mended my life." And for the first time, sleep came as softly as a breath, peaceful, warm, and whole, like a wound finally healed. The next morning, Cancun's sky was clear as crystal. Early sunlight poured through the window and lit our wedding photo. I touched the cool glass and looked at his smile, the one that stayed with me for 42 years, and then some. I stepped onto the porch. The sea stretched blue, the wind carried salt, and the scent of jasmine Lucia had just placed in a small vase. Everything at Azure Cove Villa was the same, but I wasn't. I was no longer the woman trembling after being pushed to the lowest floor of her own home. I was the woman who stood up quiet and steady and took back the right to live with dignity. At noon, Nathan called on video. Ava and Liam squeezed into the frame, laughing as they showed off. "Grandma, we grew tomatoes. They're almost as tall as me." I laughed and said, "Good. Everything beautiful starts with planting." Nathan looked at me, smile warm. "I think "You planted the most precious thing, self-respect and love." I said, "No, your dad planted it. I just tended the soil." In the afternoon, I walked the beach, leaving footprints and watching the waves erase them. Life is like that, old wounds fade and lessons remain. I stopped by the big rock where I liked to watch the sunset and murmured, "Gordon, do you see? I did it." The sun sank, a pale gold spilling across the water. From a distance, Lucia called, "Signora Cassandra, dinner is almost ready." I turned back, smiling, feeling as if I'd just closed a long book, not with a period, but with a quiet breath. Night fell, and I wrote the last lines in my journal. I lost what I thought I could never get back: trust, respect, family. But in losing, I found myself. Some victories don't roar. They're just a regular woman learning to laugh again after the storm. I closed the journal and set it on the table. Outside, the waves kept answering beat after beat, like Gordon's reply, like the breath of a new life. I turned off the light, cracked the window to let the sea air in. Moonlight washed the room in soft silver. I closed my eyes, knowing that tomorrow morning I'll step onto the porch, pour a cup of tea, and smile at the sunrise like a promise to myself that I'll live, love, and keep telling my story with peace. If you're hearing this from anywhere in the world, tell me, where are you listening from? My life may be different, but our feelings are the same. We've all been hurt, and we all long to be loved the right way. Leave a comment and tell me how you've healed a hurt with kindness. And if you believe, like I do, that kindness is still the strongest power we have, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next stories. Thank you truly for listening all the way to the end. Because if someone out there hears this journey, then I know every wound is worth healing.